Welcome to the Alliance Chat with the Chargers Alliance. My name is Ashley Jones. This is the first chat of the new academic year, and I want to take a quick moment to recognize our group from last year and note that we are proud of the Chargers Alliance and all that the group has accomplished in our first year. Enduring and excelling in a year of social unrest nationally, a divided country politically, and a lack of competition on the fields and tracks and courts that we all grown to love is a tremendous accomplishment for all of our members. As we start this new year, we'd like to reiterate that one of our main purposes is to provide a safe space for all of our student athletes to share and learn from and about one another. With that being said, we will continue to have our monthly Alliance Circle meetings for our current student athletes. Please follow our Instagram for more meeting schedule information. For today's Alliance Chat, we will be speaking with Dr. Ophelia Rowe-Allen, Dean of Students, and Carrie Robinson, Director of the Myatt Center for Diversity and Inclusion here at UNH. The topic for today is the University of New Haven's work and progress in the realm of diversity, inclusion, and belonging on campus. Welcome to you both.
Thank you.
Now, you both were hired during the last academic year, which we all can recall was a year filled with a lot of unease surrounding COVID-19 and racial injustice surrounding the number of violent acts that were happening around the country. How has the first year here at UNH gone for you both, and what progress do you think you've made thus far in the first year? We can start first with Carrie and then go to Dean Rowe-Allen.
All right, thanks y'all for having me. I think, so I've been here now for almost 9 months, which seems like it's flown by. But I think that it was a really unique situation to come into, starting, in the middle of COVID. We had been in COVID for like a year, but nobody was on campus. My whole interview process was through Zoom. So that was really interesting. And I think what's been interesting since I've gotten onto campus is that the one thing I really realized was kind of how narrow the definition of what diversity on campus was. I think oftentimes it's easy for us to kind of fall into race because that's what we can see, but there's so many more identities that lend itself to getting to inclusion and belonging. And if we don't work towards expanding that definition and who sees themselves in the Myatt Center, then I think we're never going to get to that community of inclusion and belonging. And so I think the one thing that, since I've been here, we've instituted a lot of initiatives, but I think the one great thing that all those initiatives have led to is that more students see themselves on campus. I think Dean Rowe-Allen and I try and work to dispel this myth that there's a Myatt student, right? And so what is that? Like all students, we want all students to see themselves in the Myatt Center. And so we've instituted a mentorship program to work to help first year students be retained at the university. I know we're going to talk about it later, but I've been kind of really working with you all in athletics to do some work there, really working kind of on the faculty side and the staff side and training and education, and just really looking at what are those gaps on campus and how can we create really intentional initiatives and programs to ensure that students, faculty, and staff feel that sense of inclusion and belonging on campus.
All right, thank you, Carrie. I think for me, I came into the midst of COVID. So my transition was one to remember, right? I think it's a different story from when everyone said to you, you will be able to come in and take things easy. It wasn't. I had to dive right in and begin working. But one of the things that I have done in looking at the Division of Student Affairs and really looking at the student experience and to see what is it that we want for the student experience. And Carrie have touched on it where we talk about sense of belonging, right? And how, what the sense of belonging looks like on campus, not just for students, right? But also for staff. So one of the investment is invested in staff, invested in training, in-house training, right? We know that probably we won't be able to travel because of COVID, but was very cognizant of what is it that we want our students to learn, to achieve, to experience by being in our community, right? So when we said we're a charger, what does charger looks like for a student? What does it look like for a staff? right? And for each staff member to know that they are a stakeholder within the university, right? And they have a part to play. And so the way how they're showing up in different spaces is going to be important. The way how they understand student development, the way how they understand students who are showing up in front of them is also important. And so that is something that I work hard on to ensure that we can create that set of ideals, I must say, within the division, where not only that we are result driven, but there is accountability. We see things as a sense of urgency. We celebrate short wins, both from a student side and also from a staff side. And then the other thing is, how do we work with academic affairs, right, in helping them to see us as partners, that we're equal partners when it comes on to student development, right? And especially in particular for my office is not just code of conduct, right? My office is student support. So because of that, I got a wide variety of requests from students asking for support in a variety of ways, both from the academic side, the student affairs side, because we want them, again, to stress, the part that I stress is one of our ideals is about sense of belonging and how they feel on campus. So we should be able to assist them in any way they can. And for faculty members to also know that this student affairs is also a division that they can rely on, and we can rely on them also. And so that creating that relationship was very good. They were able to send us communication when anything is happening to a student. I am concerned, right? And so we were able to reach out and we were able to communicate with that faculty members and what is it that you can do to also assist the student, not just academically. So.
Thank you. I like how you guys brought up the idea of, diversity sometimes being surface level, people not looking past that there's more than just race that isn't included within that. That being said, Carrie, along with your role at the Myatt Center, you also spoke about you serving as the NCAA Diversity Inclusion Designee for the athletics department here. So how do you see your role interacting with both the Charter Alliance and SAC as we move forward within the academic year?
Yeah, so I've been not only that, but also working within the NE10, within your conference, on doing some diversity work as well. I think that for me, you all as student athletes are so influential on campus. And I think that you all have the ability to really kind of set the tone for some of the work that gets done on campus. And so as a former student athlete, y'all are just kind of my people. And so I was really excited to be given the opportunity to work with you all. I worked with student athletes on my previous institution as well. But part of my role as kind of the NCAA DEI designee is to work with you all on not just training and education, but having these more intentional conversations with each other and then permeating them out onto campus. Part of it has been, I know you all have a schedule, a packed schedule, but how do you even see yourselves, on campus outside of North Campus, right outside of the athletic center? But for me, that also means like building intentional relationships with you all, really hearing what you want. And so then how can we kind of align your goals with what I'm doing in terms of the NCAA? I know that we're in the conference working with RISE, which is an organization that does diversity DEI workshops and programming on campus. And so we have an upcoming kind of workshop for student athletes and coaches in December that we're working on, really kind of taking an assessment, taking stock of where athletes and coaches want to see DEI go on campus. And so I've been working with Robin and the RISE organization to get that up and running. But I see moving forward in terms of SAC and in terms of, the DEI component of that, you know, really working to see where are some of those gaps that we can fill in, to ensure it's not, for me, it's not just about, you know, non-student athletes. Like, you all have to feel like a sense of inclusion and belonging on your team, and also on campus. And so how can we work to create that atmosphere where athletes feel like they belong, not just within their team, within athletics, but also on campus as well. So we're doing a lot of kind of assessing this semester so that in the spring we can do some intentional work that fills in some of the gaps that you all are looking for.
That sounds great. Looking forward to everything that will be coming in this semester and the next semester. Kind of going backwards a little bit, Dean Rowe-Allen, you were discussing how your focus is on students feeling that sense of belonging, essentially. So we know that the results of the campus climate survey have been shared with various campus groups via town hall meetings. As the chair of the university's IDA council, can you share how either one or two of the outcomes related to students that the council will be focusing on based on the climate survey?
Oh, sure. Some of the, and thank you for asking that. You know, we want to ensure that we build an infrastructure here, right? Or improve the infrastructure when it comes on to diversity and inclusion, and also to improve the climate culture. But in addition, we also want to ensure that we attract and we retain students, right? And so programming is one set that came up. Sorry, I'm just pulling it up to see here. What are some of the other things that I just want to talk about with you? We have created in the IDEA Council an area in which we can all track it and be accountable for it. One important thing that they talk about was bias on campus, right? The bias reported on campus for students. And students feel, when I got here, felt that it was pushed under the rug, right? When it comes on to bias reporting. So from my office, from the Dean of Students office, that is one thing that we're going to look at to see. One is our policies, our procedures, our process. Is it clear to students, right? Are they able to understand that if they want to report a bias, right, they are able to do so, and to know that the university will be able to assist them, and they feel a sense of support from us. The other piece that they want to see what sanctions look like, right? So we will be able to look at those and able to put it on the My Charger page where students can look at their handbook and to see students have a responsibility to read their student handbook and to hold the university accountable for the policies that we have created for you, that you're supposed to follow. And if we're not following that, we want to be held accountable for that. So in the student handbook, they will find what it means to submit a bias report, what's the process like, and so on. The other piece that they talk about was training and development, right? And what is it that we need to do when it comes on to, and I think Carrie touched on that about expanding dialogues, right? Training, education, right, related to DEI. What does it look like? And it starts with our students, to our student groups that we have on campus, our student leaders that we have on campus, but also for the university community on a whole, to ensure that we can provide these resources for them. And for DEI not to be looked at just race, right? We have diversity of thought, right? We have all of that we want to ensure that we can engage others. And we talk about difficult dialogues, right? Engaging in difficult dialogues. We call it here the Courageous Conversation series that we have. We want students to get involved in that and able to voice their opinion. We want to elevate their voices, right, as to what they're saying, and also able to support them. So those were two of the key things that I think stood out when it comes on to students and that related to students. In addition, one of the things they talk about building community, right? How do we build community? What's our capacity in doing that? And what does, when it comes on to building community, looks like for our students? When we said it is welcoming, it is respectful, right? What does that look like from the day they step in on campus, and even before, we do SOAR, we do orientation, onboarding for students. What does that look like for them so that they can see themselves on campus? And creating that campus climate is going to be quite important and crucial and critical for retaining some of our students, in particularly our underrepresented students on campus.
Thank you. I'm really glad that you mentioned the courageous conversations. One of the main goals as our organization when we were starting last year was the concept of having those uncomfortable conversations relating to diversity and inclusion. We figured that those conversations are really helpful in sort of bringing not only just awareness, but also educating us on topics that, you know, we usually don't talk about or we aren't comfortable discussing. So I know you alluded to it a little bit, but in your experience, can you give a little more example of how these courageous conversations improve the campus's climate and the sense of community?
Sure. You know, one of my favorite quote is, to reach others, we have to know, we have to first know ourselves, and to connect to a deeper truth of who we are, we must engage in some activity or practice that questions what we assume to be true about ourselves, right? Sometimes we cannot just think about the other, right? We have to think, what role are we playing, right? How are we, I talk about how are we showing up, right? What is our identity? What is our salient identity? What are some of those privilege, right, that we have earned or unearned, right? How are we using it? And so sometimes it may be hard for us to get into that part of it, right? To talk about ourselves. We never want to talk about ourselves. We want to talk about the other. But in order for us to move diversity, equity, and inclusion, we have to know who we are first, right? And that will help us to look at our attitudes, our behaviors, and the decisions that we make. So if we can't identify, because of that, we will be able to identify our biases. We all have biases, right? But if we can identify it because of knowing who we are and able to build our own awareness, knowledge, and understanding, we will be able to take actions, which means we'll be able to change our behaviors, right? We talk about, there's a model that they talk about, it comes on to uncomfortable conversation, where it is, you don't want to be in your comfort zone. You want to be what we call our learning edge, right? Which is right in the middle where you lean in, and that's where you learn best. You don't want to be in the danger zone either, right? Because it's going to be more difficult for you to get out of. And the danger zone, it's mostly because anything somebody may say, you may get offended, right? And because you're so offended, it's hard for you to get out of that because you're focusing on you so much, right? That you're forgetting, right? What's the impact versus the intent. I hope that helps.
Yes, I did. Thank you so much. Kind of shifting a little bit, we want to say that the Chargers Alliance, of course, doesn't just focus on racial injustice. We want all Chargers to feel included, meaning from all different backgrounds and identities. With that being said, we heard that the university is creating a Pride Center. What can you tell us about that? Carrie, I think you're overseeing the Pride Center, so if you had any information on that.
Yeah, so one of the things that we've done is not taking a step back from the Pride Center, but we've tried to look critically at how it fits into the Myatt Center and kind of where we're going as a center, right? So if it's the Myatt Center for Diversity and Inclusion, the Pride Center has to be in line with that, right? So not necessarily a separate space. I think that that's sometimes what we think of when we think of centers, is that it's a separate space. But I think what we've tried to think critically about is what does that mean, right? If students who are from a marginalized identity have to walk through a Pride Center door, right, that we might be unintentionally outing students, right? Because there's just going to be this feeling of, well, when I enter in there, people are going to think that I identify this way, right? And so one thing that we've looked critically at is, how do we have a Pride Center? How do we serve LGBTQ students? But how does that align and fall into the work that we're doing with the Myatt Center? And so how do we make it not necessarily a separate center, but something that is integrated into the work that we do, because there's so many intersections of identities as well within diversity. And so how do we ensure that our LGBTQ students feel a sense of inclusion and belonging and feel like they see themselves in diversity while not unintentionally having, there could be some unintentional consequences and impact of having a separate Pride Center. So we have brought on our assistant director, and we're working with them on that to kind of look critically at what their position looks like and what a Pride Center could look like, but still in line with the Myatt Center, if that kind of makes sense. So not necessarily a separate building, a separate space, but more integrated within the center, and then kind of having a dedicated staff person that specifically works to serve LGBTQ students.
Yeah, that sounds great. I noticed you brought up intersectionality. So I know you have experience with leading programs centered around cross-culturalism and intersectionality. So what would you say was the greatest outcome of these programs, and why are these two topics in particular important? That's for you, Carrie.
Oh, sorry. I was like, so I think intersectionality is critical. I think that we can't have a conversation about a certain identity without talking about intersectionality, because the three of us on this call are not one person. We are not one thing. We are not one identity, right? We are complex people. But I think it's also important to understand that we might hold similar identities, but our experiences within those identities are often also very different, or how we've been socialized in those identities, or how we've been socialized to think about those identities and view those identities. And so I think that, we can't think of identities as kind of these singular things. And so I think these cross-cultural conversations and these conversations about different intersections of identities allow us to critically, as an institution, look at how we support students from various backgrounds, but also what are some of the barriers, right? It's allowed me to have conversations with different offices about how students utilize their resources and utilize their services, right? Talk about the identity barriers that exist to students using accessibility or counseling, right? And how do we work together collaboratively? So being able to have those open, honest conversations with them, be receptive to that, and then say, okay, how do we then make sure that we're breaking down some of those barriers? So I think even just within staff and departments and faculty, being able to have those conversations about intersection and cross-culturalism is really important. But I think that the less we silo students' identities, the more they feel that sense of inclusion and belonging on campus. Like I talk a lot about how, or students talk to me a lot about how, this feeling of like, I have to wear a mask in the classroom because I'm the only X, right? And so how do we create more spaces on campus where students can come in and be authentically themselves, right? When they walk in the Myatt Center, they can drop that mask and they can just be themselves. But how do we create more of those spaces on campus so that students don't feel like they have to hide their identities or hide certain things about them, but they're just able to show up as their 100% authentic selves? So I think that's the importance of these conversations, is to not silo students' identities, because all we're doing is really making my job harder, right? Really making my job towards inclusion and belonging harder when we silo students' identities.
Yeah, it's great to hear. It seems like both of your discussions kind of align with our group's goals ultimately, surrounding student athletes and inclusions, feeling like they belong on their teams within each other, teammates. And aside from athletics, when you leave North and you're on campus, do you still feel that sense of inclusion within your classrooms or the dining hall or anything like that? So yeah, hearing your guys' ideas and goals from the university is really amazing, and it shows great promise to the ultimate progress that's going to be made here at the university. That brings me to the topic of lasting impacts and legacies. So many years from now, after you retired, left the university, and people look back on your legacy, what is it that you'd like to be said about your achievements due to your roles surrounding diversity and inclusion work here at the University of New Haven? You can start with you
Retire.
first,
How
Dean.
old do you think we are?
Oh my God, I know, right?
Well, eventually.
Uh,
We can start with you first, Dean.
Okay, I think, there are certain principles, there are certain guiding principles that I hope that the community, right, as a community, even if I left here, that they will continue to practice. And for me, I would want to know that no language is inferior, right? Because we're so different on this campus, right? We sometimes may see that language may be inferior because of who we are, right? And so it is not, I want people to see that, right? And to embrace the different kinds that we have on campus. The next thing is no one should be invisible. So how is it that we can work hard, right, to ensure, you talk about inclusion, right? Inclusion on a team. How can we ensure that everyone feel included, right? It's not about equality, but about equity, right? And so that's another point. Then no community in particularly, right, should be not significant, right? Sometimes we may leave out others, we may leave out community, right? Certain communities. The other thing is for us to also understand that our views of the world is shaped by our values, our perceptions, our assumptions, and our expectations, right? That's why I said we all have biases. And if we are aware of that, then it's for us as a community to, one, know our culture, know about our culture, but also for them to know more about others, right? Other cultures. And I think we will have better communication. And lastly, the way one does see things or do things when coupled with others in the way how they see things and do things can lead to new ways, right? Or improved ways of doing and seeing things from a different lens. And the last thing that I would say is being different is okay. And differences can be recognized and should be recognized, should be acknowledged, should be validated, should be cherished.
I mean, that's pretty hard to follow, but I mean, I have a pretty simple legacy. For me, it's I want students to look back on their time at UNH and say, I felt like I belonged there. You know, I didn't feel this sense of imposter syndrome. I felt like I belonged there. And students who maybe come from more privileged identities say, I was challenged. My understanding of different things, my worldview changed, which made me a better person, taught me empathy, made me a better person in the workplace. And so I mean, that's ultimately, if I can get students to look back on their time and say that as alumni, then I've done my job, in my opinion, and I've left my mark. So it's a pretty simple one, but I think in theory, it means a lot to students. And so, and also faculty and staff. I think sometimes we forget as faculty and staff that we have identities that are impacted by this stuff. And so I think that it's really important that faculty and staff also say that they felt like they belonged during their time here.
Those were very great and insightful answers. That was all the questions that we had for you guys today. Just want to thank you guys so much for having this discussion with me and talking about the university's work and the progress of diversity, inclusion, and belonging here on campus. We wish you both continued luck in your efforts on campus, and we're eagerly looking forward to new efforts being made. Thank you so much.
Mm.
Thank
Thank you so
y'all.
much for having us.
Can't wait to work with y'all.
Yeah.